And as we move on, our next speaker will be Mike Busch from Savvy Aviation. And if you look at my agenda, I spelled Savvy wrong. I didn't get both V's in Savvy, so my apologize to the guys at Savvy and to Mike. But looking forward to hearing what he's got to say when I learned more about what these guys did with their maintenance data tracking and helping prevent or predict maintenance and make it more efficient. I was really excited about it, and I'm looking forward to hear the full presentation of what Mike's got with us today. So Mike, go ahead with your presentation then.
Hi, I'm Mike Busch. I've been involved in general aviation for about 55 years, initially as an aircraft owner, pilot, flight instructor, later as an A&P and IA. I've written 4 books on general aviation, maintenance, and aircraft ownership. And about 13 years ago, I started a company called Savvy Aviation. Originally, we started the company with the mission of providing maintenance management services for owner-flown general aviation, mostly piston GA. And in the 13 years, the company has diversified into providing a broad range of services to aircraft owners. And one of the services that we provide that represents about a third of our business now is analyzing data from aircraft engine monitors. Nowadays, they monitor more than just engines. And Glenn asked me if I would talk to you about what we've been doing and what the latest developments in that field are. And I said, I would be glad to do that. So I'd like to talk to you about predictive maintenance, both generally what's happening in that area in aviation, and more specifically, what we're doing in general aviation. For years, I've been preaching the gospel of reliability-centered maintenance. My first book, titled Manifesto, was largely about reliability-centered maintenance. There are numerous textbooks on the subject. I'm not going to go very deep into RCM, but except to say that it's a science of trying to optimize maintenance programs to provide the best maintenance at lowest cost. And originally, maintenance was done purely on a corrective basis. The airplanes flew until something broke, and then they got fixed. That turned out to be very inconvenient because things broke typically in very inconvenient places and times. And then we started doing maintenance on a scheduled preventive maintenance basis, where if you look at the maintenance manuals of any GA aircraft, you'll see literally hundreds of scheduled preventive maintenance items, things to be done every 50 hours or 100 hours or every year, or every 5 years, or every so many landings. But it turned out that when we do maintenance that way, we wind up doing more maintenance than is necessary. And not only does that drive up the cost, but it also makes the airplanes less reliable, because the more we take them apart and put them back together, the greater the opportunity for what I call maintenance-induced failure. About 20% of all aircraft accidents are due to something that a mechanic did, as opposed to 80% being something that a pilot did. And so there's 2 reasons not to over-maintain these airplanes. One is cost, and the other is that the more we maintain them, the less reliable they become. So RCM is based on doing things on condition, and its purpose is to optimize cost and provide the optimal combination of in terms of how the maintenance program is constructed. The two primary tenets of reliability-centered maintenance, and it is a very deep subject. As I said, there are lots of big textbooks on this subject, but the two main tenets of reliability-centered maintenance that reduce preventive maintenance drastically are the following. First of all, we want to think about the consequences of failures, and we don't want to be doing preventive maintenance to prevent failures that have acceptable consequences. I mean, for example, if you have two comm radios and one of them fails, that's an acceptable consequence. We have the redundancy to deal with it. It's not going to interfere with anything. We'll just fix the number two comm radio when it's convenient. So for things with acceptable failures, we avoid doing preventive maintenance, and we accept a philosophy called run to failure. It used to be anathema. We couldn't allow anything in aircraft to fail, but now we're smarter than that. We know that there are a lot of things in aircraft that can be allowed to fail without compromising safety or the mission. The second big principle in RCM is to do preventive maintenance strictly on condition wherever practicable, rather than on a fixed timetable. And the more we can do it on condition, the more optimized it should be. We only want to do maintenance when there's a good reason to do it, not just because some number came up on the TAC or the Hobbs meter. So condition-based maintenance requires determining condition. And how do we do that? Well, there are a lot of ways to do that. Sometimes we do it through disassembly inspection, like magnetos, by direct visual inspection. And we have more powerful tools to do that now because we do a lot of work with bore scopes where we can do direct visual inspection of things that we didn't used to be able to visualize that way. We have lots of methods for determining condition based on indirect evidence, things like compression checks, oil analysis, oil filter inspection, that sort of thing. And increasingly now, we're able to determine condition based on sensor data. And condition determination based on sensor data is this new field called predictive analytics that I'm going to be talking about. So that's really what I'm going to be emphasizing in my talk to you today. So reliability-centered maintenance was sort of a quiet revolution in aviation maintenance philosophy that started in the late 60s and early 70s. During the past 2 decades, there's been another quiet revolution going on in this field of predictive analytics. And it's been pioneered by the airlines. It's quietly trickling down the aviation food chain to Piston General Aviation, although we're quite far behind the airlines in this area. But eventually it's going to have a profound effect on how general aviation maintenance is done, I believe. If you look at a modern air transport aircraft like a 787 or something, those aircraft and their engines are built with thousands of sensors. Pretty much everything that can be measured in these airplanes have sensors that measure just every conceivable parameter that you can think of. Engine, electrical, hydraulic, air data, vibration sensors, flight control positions, landing gear positions, fluid levels, and all of the different things that have fluid in them, that sort of thing. And all the data from these sensors is digitized by a data acquisition unit. And then it's either downlinked to the ground in real time while the airplane is flying, or it's captured in something called a quick access recorder and extracted from the airplane as soon as it lands. And so predictive analytics employs computer algorithms to process all of this sensor data and try to detect patterns that indicate either that preventive maintenance is necessary or that some component is reaching the point where it's likely to fail incipiently. And so the whole purpose of all of this computer analysis of sensor data is to, again, try to do a better job of deciding when maintenance is necessary. When we do it on a scheduled basis, we're typically doing it way too early. A scheduled maintenance is ultra conservative, and it winds up doing more maintenance than is necessary. Condition-based maintenance was a significant improvement, but predictive maintenance tries to go a step further and provide a more efficient way of determining when maintenance should be done. We don't want things to deteriorate to the point that they fail, and that we have to do corrective maintenance unless it's something that is okay to fail, so something that has acceptable consequences. But we don't want to do it too early either. So the whole idea of predictive maintenance is to try to catch it just in time. Now, there are different things that we look at when we look at this sensor data. A fair amount of it are things that are just parameters that we're looking for degradation or exceedance of some limit or some trend that we don't like. Things like low tire pressure, high electrical bus voltage, decreasing oil pressure. And those are very, very easy to detect. Computers are, it's a very simple exercise to analyze the data and look for things like that. The more interesting things that we try to do with this data is prediction of rare events, things that don't happen very often. Contaminated fuel nozzle, a damaged compressor blade, a failing engine bearing. And prediction of rare events tends to be pretty difficult and require complex algorithms. I'll talk to you about a little work that we're doing in this area for piston GA engines in a little bit. But at any rate, those are the hard things to do, but they're the things with the biggest payoff. Now, this whole field of predictive analytics was really pioneered by Boeing in 2004 when it launched a program called Airplane Health Management, AHM. And the AHM monitors the health of an airplane in flight and relays that information real time to airline personnel on the ground. It actually relays it to a war room that Boeing maintains. I had the opportunity to spend a half day visiting it and seeing all what's going on. It's very, very impressive. And then that the information is distributed to the various airlines. So when an airplane lands and arrives at the gate, maintenance personnel already have been made aware of anything that they need to do. If the right hand nose tire is under pressure, or there's some low fluid level or something like that, they know it before the airplane even lands, and they're all ready to jump on it to minimize downtime and get the airplane turned around. So these algorithms, besides just looking for the simple things, also try to predict aircraft components failures, so that the components can be replaced or repaired at the next scheduled maintenance check. And nowadays, every airline that flies the more advanced Boeings, 777s, 787s, imagine the 737 MAX as well, use this program and have had pretty spectacular results. Now, Boeing was the pioneer in this area. They're certainly not alone. There are a lot of major players that are doing work in the predictive analytics area. Airbus entered into a partnership a couple of years ago with Delta Airlines as the pilot customer for its version of AHM that they call Skywise Predictive Maintenance. And they were doing this on the Delta's fleet of A320s and A330s. And in the first few years of this program, Delta has claimed an absolutely remarkable success rate predicting failures before they happen. And the statistic that I found really quite remarkable was in 2010, before they started doing all of this, they had logged more than 5,600 maintenance-related flight cancellations due to squawks on the airplane that prevented it from being dispatched back out. And in 2018, after they had been on this predictive analytics program, the Skywise program, they logged 55 maintenance-related flight cancellations. So it was a 2 order of magnitude improvement. That's probably a small enough sample that you can't read too much into it, but it is awfully impressive, and the potential for predictive analytics, I think, is really huge. So much for the airlines. What about Piston General Aviation? Well, we've been doing quite a bit of work on this. As I said, we're way behind the airlines. This is a very fledgling area when it comes to Piston General Aviation. But in 2013, Savvy Aviation was founded in 2008, and in 2013 we launched this program called Savvy Analysis. That was a program to provide analysis of digital engine monitor data. Nowadays, something a little north of half the Piston GA fleet is equipped with some sort of a recording digital engine monitor. Some of them are old and pretty crude. Some of them are new and extremely fancy and have a large number of sensor inputs to them. So it kind of varies all over the place. But something over half the fleet is currently equipped with some sort of a recording monitor that captures data that can be downloaded from the aircraft and analyzed. We created this program using sort of a freemium model. We put up a very, very fancy software platform for analyzing the data, and we made this available to the user community free. So we have like 10,000 aircraft using this platform. We also offer a paid service called Savvy Analysis Pro, where users upload data to the system and then ask our team of professional analysts to analyze it for them. And we also have a program called ProPax that's targeted to mechanics and shops as opposed to aircraft owners. So at any rate, this platform we created is a web-based platform, so that it can be used on literally any device that has a standard web browser. We don't care if you have a PC or a Mac, or if you're doing it on an iPad. It all works. And we built the system to be omnilingual. It supports literally every make and model of digital engine monitor, both certificated ones and experimental ones. Some of the most sophisticated ones are the ones that are in experimental aircraft. Dynon has some just phenomenal capabilities that you see in a lot of experimental aircraft. So at any rate, but pretty much any aircraft with any model of digital engine monitor that records data and can dump the data, we can handle on our platform. It has turned out to be an amazingly powerful tool for diagnosing all sorts of problems with piston aircraft. Mechanical problems, operational problems. We see a lot of stupid pilot tricks that we can identify in the data and tell a pilot, hey, you really shouldn't be doing that. You should be doing it this way instead. We see instrumentation problems where, things like, failing sensors and so on. We always have to be able to distinguish between real problems and instrumentation problems. And to some extent, we do forensic analysis. We work with the NTSB, doing analysis of data extracted from aircraft that have been involved in accidents, so on. One of the neatest things about using engine monitor data for diagnostic purposes is that it's completely non-invasive. You don't have to take anything apart to inspect it. You just dump the digital data and look at it, and it's amazing the things that we're able to determine just by looking at the engine monitor data. So, for example, the engine monitor data is probably the best thing I know of for assessing the condition of ignition systems, and we can find out, determine all sorts of problems that with ignition systems that would be very hard to determine otherwise. Here's an example. For instance, this is where one of the things we always ask our clients to do. We have a flight test profile that we ask them to fly, and one part of the flight test profile is to do an in-flight mag check, and do it very slowly so that we get quite a few data points captured by the digital engine monitor. And so here's a mag check that was done in flight, and we like to have it done at cruise power and with the leanest possible mixture, preferably a lean at peak mixture, because the leaner the mixture and the higher the power, the more difficult it is for spark plug to ignite the fuel air mixture. So to test out the condition of the ignition system, we really want to put the ignition system under a maximum stress, if you will, and put it under worst case conditions. And a higher power, very lean mixture is the most demanding situation for an ignition system. So if it looks good under those conditions, it's going to be in really good shape. Whereas the mag check that we do during run up on the ground at pre-flight will only detect the grossest ignition system malfunctions. But if we do an in-flight mag check at relatively high power and very lean mixture, that's a really, really good test. So here's one, and when we look at it, we can see a couple of interesting things. When the engine is running on the left mag, the right hand lobe here, you can see that one of the spark plugs, the one that's coated in orange, it's actually the number 5 spark plug. The EGT is quite erratic compared to the other ones. And what that is saying is that spark plug is doing an erratic job of igniting the mixture in that cylinder. On some combustion events, it's successfully igniting it, and some combustion events, it's not. So it's marginal. And because it's on the left mag, the number 5 EGT, we know it's the number 5 bottom plug, and we'll suggest to the owner that he really needs to pull the bottom 5, the number 5 bottom plug, and either clean it and gap it or put a new plug in there. The other thing that we notice looking at this is that we get an EGT rise when we're on a single mag operation compared to dual mag operation, which is normal. But we're getting a bigger rise when we switch to the left mag than we are with right mag. And normally those two rises should be approximately the same. So when we see this, what that tells us is that the two mags aren't timed the same. Now we can't really tell which one is off, but we can tell that one of them must be off. So when we see something like this, we'll suggest that the owner have a mechanic put a buzz box on there and check the mag timing, because one of the mags is going to be off. So that gives you an idea of the sort of thing that we can do looking at this data. The other area that this is extremely useful is dealing with all sorts of fuel system problems. The other part of the flight test profile that we ask owners to fly is what's called a GAMI lean test, where they do multiple very slow sweeps of the mixture control from a rich mixture to an extremely lean mixture and back again. And we can watch what the EGTs do as the fuel flow varies. And the key thing that we do is compute what's called a GAMI spread, which is the fuel flow difference between when the leanest cylinder peaks and when the richest cylinder peaks. And of course, in a perfect world, they would all peak at the same time. In the real world, they never do. But that GAMI spread's a good measure of how poor or good the mixture distribution is. So that in this case, for example, you can see that there's a lean outlier. Number 3 is leaner than the other ones. It peaks earlier as the mixture control is being retarded. And so we'll suggest, the first thing we'll suggest is pulling the number 3 injector nozzle and cleaning it. And if that doesn't resolve the problem, then probably a one size larger injector ought to be installed in that to try to get the mixture distribution to be the same. Abnormal combustion events. This is something more in the forensic area, but we have captured lots of data when very interesting things happen in the combustion chamber. This is an example of a pre-ignition event, very, very classic pre-ignition event. The pilot applies takeoff power. The CHTs and EGTs start coming up normally. And then all of a sudden, the cylinder number 3 has a thermal runaway. And in a period of less than 2 minutes, the CHT on the number 3 cylinder increases from 374 Fahrenheit to 653 Fahrenheit, less than 2 minutes. It's at a rate of 2.6 degrees per second, which is extremely rapid. And again, our platform gives us the ability to just tag 2 points, and it'll automatically calculate the rise rate, and so on. Any increase in cylinder head temperature over about 1 degree per second is normally associated with a pre-ignition event. It's the only thing that's quite violent enough to heat up that big head casting that quickly. But we also see lots of detonation events which play out more slowly, but also result in a rise of cylinder head temperature way above what it ought to be. So we've gotten pretty good at recognizing this kind of stuff. And then, of course, whenever we see something like that, our first suggestion is to stick a bore scope in the cylinder. Heavy detonation, pre-ignition leave very distinctive signatures, mostly on the piston crown, that you can identify very easily with a bore scope. Most of these engine monitors let us see at least bus voltage, sometimes various currents, and we can do a pretty good job of analyzing whether the charging system is working properly. We do a lot of Cirruses. They have a dual electrical system that's fairly complicated, dual bus, dual alternator, and dual battery. And we're able to see a lot of stuff in the electrical system on that airplane and pretty much diagnose what's wrong. Again, sometimes we have to deal with instrumentation problems, defective probes, bad connectors, that sort of thing, and we need to be able to distinguish between something caused by a bad probe and something that's a real problem. And there are a bunch of it's usually not too hard to do that. We see a lot of operational issues with pilots using poor power plant management techniques and not keeping their temperatures well controlled and so on. And we can see all that in the engine monitor data and give them some tips about what they ought to be doing. So since we first started doing this in 2013, we've now accumulated in our database more than 3,500,000 flights flown by piston GA aircraft. And that's a lot of data. And there's some interesting things you can do when you have a lot of data like that. And so we've been working on that. In 2015, we launched a program called the report card program. And the concept of the report card program was to give the aircraft owner a report on how various critical parameters, sensor parameters for their aircraft compared with all of the other aircraft of the same type that we monitor in our system. And we have pretty much every kind of airplane flying in that system, but we have a lot of Cirruses, we have a lot of Vans RVs, lots of twin Cessnas and Cessna 210s and Bonanzas and stuff. And so the idea is if you're flying a Bonanza, the report card will let you see how you're doing compared to all the other Bonanzas that we follow. And that group of aircraft that we compare you against is what's called a cohort. If you think about like oil analysis reports, some of the labs, like the Blackstone lab that we tend to use, provide in your oil reports not just the data from your particular engine, but also a mean of the data for all of the other engines of the same type that they follow. So you have something to compare your data with, and that's the concept here with a report card. So, for example, here's kind of what a report card looks like, and I'll take just a quick look at some of the stuff on here. But this particular report card was for a Cirrus SR-22, and it was comparing the result of 27 flights by this particular aircraft against 46,886 flights of 741 other Cirrus SR-22s that we follow. And so for each parameter, there's a block on the report card that looks like this, that has a thermometer on it, and then some verbiage. The thermometer, the color bar on the thermometer depicts the percentiles of that parameter that we've seen in the cohort, and the blue line that runs down the middle of the thermometer is the actual values for the subject aircraft that we're reporting on, where there's a dot that represents the median, and then the two extremes of that line are the minimum and maximum in that parameter that we saw. And so each block contains one of these thermometers, and then some textual information that where we sort of interpret what it means and any corrective action that we think ought to be taken. In 2017, we added the ability to do longitudinal studies across a range of flights over a date range, where we would look at parameters. In this case, it's maximum CHT during the cruise phase of the flight. We create a scatter diagram of it. We calculate a trend line. We do some mathematical analysis to determine whether the trend is statistically significant, which in this case it is. And although the dots are all over the place, the mathematical analysis shows that there's a statistically significant increase in cruise CHT over this period of time that this trend analysis is being done. All these reports, the report card and trend analysis and so on, we will send out periodically to our clients, but they can also go online anytime and ask for them on demand. So if they're looking for a particular date range or something, they just go on a website and pull the report card or trend analysis report right on the spot. So that brings us to the area of predictive analytics. We stuck our little toe in the water in the area of predictive analytics in 2014 when we introduced something called FEVA, Failing Exhaust Valve Analytics. What we were trying to do is come up with a computer algorithm that would scan uploaded engine monitor data, looking for signs that an exhaust valve was starting to fail. Exhaust valve failure is the primary catastrophic failure mode of piston engine cylinders that will cause a cylinder to just pack up and quit. And if you're flying a 6-cylinder aircraft and it swallows an exhaust valve, the engine gets really rough. And if you're flying a 4-cylinder aircraft and you lose a cylinder, you're probably going to wind up making a precautionary landing on a off airport, because 4-cylinder engines don't run nearly as well on 3 cylinders as 6-cylinder engines do on 5 cylinders. But in any case, we had noticed over the years that when exhaust valves start to fail, they frequently, not always, but they frequently exhibit an unusual oscillation of exhaust gas temperature. And the oscillation is unusual in that it is very slow and rhythmic. And most of the time when we see this and we drill down on it, it turns out that the EGT is oscillating at something like 1 cycle per minute, which is very slow. It's such a slow oscillation that you never notice it in the cockpit. But we clearly see it in the data. And why would it be so slow? Well, it turns out that the exhaust valves in these engines have a rotator cap on them that causes the valve to rotate a tiny fraction of a degree every time the valve opens and closes. And it does this both to equalize the temperature distribution on the valve, and also to try to keep the deposits that accumulate on the valve seat to clean them off by rotating the valve. In any case, it turns out that when an aircraft engine is running at a typical cruise RPM, that valve is actually rotating at something like 1 revolution per minute. So if the valve is leaking gas out of a hot spot someplace, and the rotator is still working, then that hot spot will wind up rotating around about once per minute, and then it'll rotate from the hottest portion of the combustion chamber to the coolest portion, and so on. And so we'll see this very subtle, very slow, very rhythmic EGT oscillation. So we came up with an algorithm to detect that. We back tested on a whole lot of data and kept tuning it until we had the minimum number of false positives and so on. And came up with an algorithm that had some moderate success at predicting incipient exhaust valve failures. And whenever we would see this in the data, we would notify the owner and say, you need to stick a bore scope in that cylinder, take a look at the exhaust valve ASAP, and see if it's got this distinctive asymmetric heat signature on it that would be indicative of the fact that the valve is starting to fail. Now, this was a heuristic algorithm, to be honest with you, we weren't completely thrilled with its accuracy. So we thought about, wondered whether we could do something better. And so we started getting interested in using an artificial intelligence technique called machine learning, where instead of us as humans saying, well, this is what we think a failing exhaust valve looks like, and then writing a computer algorithm to detect that pattern that agreed with the human analyst, let the computer figure out what a failing exhaust valve looks like by giving it lots and lots and lots of data and telling it which of those flights turned out to have a failed exhaust valve. And computers turn out to be very, very good at, in fact, much better than humans at recognizing these patterns. So we created this new program called Savvy AI, where we would be using artificial intelligence techniques and in particular machine learning techniques in order to try to do a better job of predicting failures. And we wound up coming up with a whole new version of FEVA that we call FEVA 2.0, that instead of using this heuristic algorithm looking at exhaust, at EGT oscillations, used machine learning techniques. And we fed it data from lots and lots of flights, and we told it which of those flights were known to have failing exhaust valves based on a borescope inspection or something. We'd recorded a lot of that information on our maintenance management tickets. So we searched through the maintenance management tickets looking for incidents where there were exhaust valve problems and cylinders had to be pulled because of bad exhaust valves and so on. And so we fed all of this data into a machine learning algorithm and let it crunch on it for a while, and come up with its own algorithm for predicting exhaust valve failures. And when we compared the result of the machine learning algorithm with the heuristic that we had been using in FEVA 1.0, it turned out that FEVA 2.0 did a much, much better job of predicting exhaust valve failures. And it would predict failures of different kinds that we weren't picking up at all with FEVA 1.0 heuristic. We also, as part of what we did with FEVA 2.0, and instead of it being a kind of a go no go thing that rang a bell when it thought it saw something that was a problem, the FEVA 2.0 algorithm actually tries to compute a risk probability of probability of failure, and comes up with a number, a score for each cylinder in the engine. Then the higher the score, the more likely it is, we think, that the exhaust valve is in jeopardy. So, if you compare FEVA 1.0, it used a single variable, that is EGT, and in fact, oscillation of EGT that met certain criteria as a predictor of exhaust valve failures. With FEVA 2.0, we have 34 predictors that go into the algorithm, all sorts of stuff. Humans are just not capable of coming up with algorithms with 34 independent variables. Our brains don't work that way, but computers do a very good job of doing that. So, at any rate, we let the machine figure out how to predict this thing instead of us trying to teach it how to predict it. So we feed all this data into an algorithm. We give it training cases that where we know that the valve was good or we know the valve was bad, and it just goes through this mathematical black box and comes out with a score, a risk score. And it's kind of magic. And when people ask us, well, what's the reason that the algorithm said that my number 3 cylinder was at high risk of failure? We can't answer that question because we don't know why it came up with that. It's a very complicated mathematical function. That's one of the frustrating things about machine learning is it does a really good job, but we can't explain exactly why. It's too complicated. And the other neat thing about the machine learning approach is that the algorithm keeps getting better and better because we keep running more training cases through it and keep teaching it. Every day, Savvy gets 850 new flights added to our database, about 365 new ticket posts, and from time to time we create a new, bigger training set, run it through the algorithm, and kind of retune it. And so it's just going to keep getting better and better over time. This is what the FEVA 2.0 report originally looked like. It was a bar graph. It had a bar for each cylinder in the engine. The higher the bar, the greater we felt the risk was. We quantified the risk into 3 categories of below average risk, and above average risk. Cylinder that scored below average risk was about half as likely to have an exhaust valve failure as the average cylinder, and those that were classified as above average risk were likely to have four times as likely to have an exhaust valve failure as the average cylinder. And we colored the bars green if it was below average, blue if it was average, and red if it was above average. And we titled the report FIVA 2.0 Exhaust Valve Failure Risk. And here's a graph that kind of shows how the risk things appeared on a scatter diagram, and how we created this algorithm that was sort of a best fit to come up with the score. So after working on this for a long time, we finally decided it was ready for prime time. We started sending these reports out to our clients. And guess what happened? They freaked out. But first of all, they saw this thing called failure risk, which really got their attention. And then if they ever had a red bar that said above average failure risk, it was like, oh my God, I'm going to die. I mean, it was just this gigantic overreaction to it. And we recognized that it's not only important to do the math right, but it's also important to do the psychology right. So we wound up revamping the report in a number of ways to try to elicit the appropriate reaction from owners, which is, maybe you ought to stick a borescope in there, but not a panicky reaction from owners, which is what we were getting originally. So the reports that we're putting out now look more like this. First of all, we stopped calling it failure risk. We just call it exhaust valve condition. Nice neutral term. We don't color the bars, red, blue, and green. We sort of use a spectrum thing, and even the highest risk isn't red; it's orange, because we just didn't want to panic people. And on the left-hand side, instead of calling it above average, or below average, we put a probability of failure percentage, so that even the highest bar, you can see that the probability of failure is only about 8% or something like that. It's not anything to just freak out about. And we'll continue to fine tune the psychology of this in order to get the appropriate reaction from aircraft owners. It was an interesting challenge. We thought this was a highly technical thing, and then when we deployed it, we discovered that there were some very non-technical aspects to it that we had to work on. But you get the idea. This thing gives the same information as the last one. It just does it in a different way that hopefully comes across a little less panicky. Another algorithm we're working on right now, which we call SIVA, is looking to identify sticky exhaust valves. This is a big problem, particularly with Lycoming engines, where we're seeing a lot of stuck valves that if they're caught early, it's no big deal. You don't even have to pull the cylinder. You just drop the valve in the cylinder and ream out the guide, put the valve back in, everything's good. But if it's not caught in time, it can result in quite bad things. It can result in, bent push rods. It can result in valve strikes. We even had cases where a valve strike caused the head of an exhaust valve to pop off and shatter a piston, cause a catastrophic engine failure. So we were working on an algorithm to identify sticky exhaust valves. We're starting off with a heuristic approach, and we may ultimately apply machine learning to this one as well. But it's a rare situation. It's a little difficult when you don't have an awful lot of known failure cases to run through the algorithm. The classic way that we detect this stuff without a computer is what's generally called morning sickness, where when an engine gets a sticking exhaust valve, the first sign is that when you first start the engine, it runs real rough for 30 seconds, a minute, and 2 minutes, because one of the cylinders doesn't start combusting until the engine warms up a little bit. And so a savvy owner who understands this stuff will recognize that symptom and will do something about it. But most owners aren't really sensitive to this, and they kind of ignore it and say, it always does that. It'll clear up and it'll run smooth, by the time I get to the run-up area, and it does. And so they kind of ignore the early warning sign. So we wanted to see if we could come up with something that would strengthen the early warning. So we've been working on a heuristic algorithm that identifies, looks for basically EGT dropouts or EGTs that fail to come up shortly after engine start while the cylinders are still warming up. And we've done a bunch of analysis on this to try to get the algorithm as good as we can get it. We're still actually tweaking it. We have not rolled it out yet, but that's probably our second predictive analytics algorithm that we're going to be putting into our platform, hopefully within the coming month or two. Another thing that we're working on, which I think is very exciting, we're in the very early stages of this, is what's called clustering analysis. In clustering analysis, we look at n-dimensional scatter diagrams, basically of various parameters. This is just showing 2-dimensional ones, but we can basically create these n-dimensional scatter diagrams where, when we look at a large number of flights, the dots tend to cluster into patterns, footprints, if you will, of what is normal. And once we have developed these clusters, we can then analyze data looking for data points that fall outside of the cluster. And we can look for how far outside it is. And if we get a significant number of data points that are outside of what we have established as the normal clustering, then we tag that flight as something that is interesting, and we'll flag it for one of our human analysts to take a look at. The clustering algorithm doesn't really tell us what it is that's wrong. It's not like FIVA, where it's looking for a particular kind of failure. It's looking for sort of something that's out of the ordinary and flagging it so that our professional analysts can take a look at the data. Because right now, when somebody signs up for our Savvy Analysis Pro service, they have to tell us which flights they want us to look at. And with clustering, we'll be able to maybe tell them which flights are interesting, which will make the service, vastly more useful. So we're in the very early stages of this, but I consider this to be very, very exciting technology, because I think it'll let us catch a lot of things that are presently not being caught. So what's next on the agenda? One of the things we want to do is create algorithms for detecting detonation and pre-ignition events. Particularly detonation events, sometimes the pilot isn't even aware that they happen, but there's the potential for damage. And this is the sort of thing where if one of these events occurs, we definitely want to stick a borescope in and see if there was any significant damage that needs to be dealt with. So we want to be able to identify these events in the data, and flag any flight where we see what looks like a detonation signature. Pre-ignition events, the pilot's always aware of, because usually pre-ignition event ends with something in the cylinder melting or coming apart. But detonation is a little more subtle, and it frequently goes undetected by the pilot. So we want to make sure that those events are detected so that somebody can take a look inside the cylinder and see if it did any damage. As I mentioned, we're working on this clustering thing, to detection of nonspecific out of cluster events that warrant human analyst attention. And, we're somewhat limited by how many sensors there are in the aircraft, how much data we have to look at. The older legacy aircraft tend to have relatively few sensors, maybe just EGTs and CHTs, or maybe a few more things. The newer aircraft tend to have a lot more sensors, and we can look at, air data, we can look at GPS position, we can look at roll, pitch, yaw, all sorts of things. And over time, we think that, the trend is very clear that we're going to have more and more sensors in our aircraft and more data to look at. And the more data we have to look at, the more exciting things we'll be able to do with it. So I think predictive maintenance is clearly the wave of the future. As I said, the more sensors we have, the more we can do. And over time, it will increasingly be our aircraft rather than our mechanics that tell us what maintenance needs to be done, which in my view is the way things ought to be. So that's all I have. I hope you enjoyed it. Here's my contact information if you're interested in dropping me an email with any questions that you might have. And our website, we can read more about the services that our company offers. 4 books that I have that are available on Amazon.com. On the last 3 books, the engines books and the 2 ownership books, are both over 500 pages. Are pretty comprehensive books. So at any rate, that's what I have, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to participate in this program.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Really appreciate the info there. Technology has moved us so far from where many of us started in aviation. And so it's great that we can take advantage of that and use that. I know there's been some questions come in. Mike had some changes in things, and he's not able to be here for the Q&A, but we'll collect those questions. We'll get those to him, and we'll get you some answers. I know I've already communicated with him about a dynon in the airplane I fly. So we're going to see what we can come up with for that. So let's take a 15-minute break, and 15 minutes from now, we will be back. We're going to have a schedule change there. John Egler's had some things come up in his schedule. So we're going to go ahead and bump John Egler up and the MSI report to first thing after break. So 15 minutes, we'll see you right back here.